Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kristina Etter. I am a Teller County resident and a journalist and writer in the legal cannabis and hemp industries. Now, for the last 6 years, I have made my living researching, investigating, and writing about the science and technology that are driving these industries. Now, recently, our Teller County Sheriff released a podcast condemning Cripple Creek's efforts to allow cannabis businesses into the city to help encourage tourism and increase city revenues. However, many of the points that the sheriff used for this argument were simply untrue. As a journalist, editor, and fact checker, I had to make sure that the correct information was published so that residents can make an informed and educated decision when they're voting on this initiative come this November. I attempted to meet with the sheriff regarding these facts and data points, and during our meeting, he refused to even discuss it. I offered to help his department and our county change the narrative and take a more responsible and informed approach to legal cannabis. Now, Sheriff Mikesell told me that he didn't have time for it, and he encouraged me to publish an opposing podcast with these data points in it, and that's what this podcast is going to do. Now, one other thing that I want to make perfectly clear as I'm publishing this podcast and talking about these data points, by no means is any disrespect intended for our law enforcement in this podcast. I am simply trying to get the correct facts and data out there. In fact, I deliberately withheld publishing this podcast for several days simply because I knew that our sheriff's department was mourning the loss of one of their own out of El Paso County. So by no means do I mean any disrespect by this podcast. I want the sheriff's department to understand that and know that these are simply the facts that I'm trying to make very clear for people as they head to the election this November and start to fill out their ballots. So let's dive into the information and let's get started right away. The sheriff started his podcast with an emphasis on the rising crime in Colorado, with claims that legal cannabis is the cause. He said, "We're not prosecuting people like we used to. The decriminalization of hard drugs has created such an influx that it makes it difficult for us to do anything." The problem with this statement is that Colorado has not decriminalized hard drugs. Possession of small amounts of drugs is now a misdemeanor. Hard drugs have not been decriminalized. Now, in the next segment, the sheriff uses his podcast for political awareness to discuss parole violations and bond reform, and he blames the new legislation for reducing the amount of time that he can keep offenders in jail. While these may be good political talking points, the fact of the matter is, legal cannabis consumers aren't doing anything illegal. Therefore, these issues do not apply to legal cannabis consumers. In a recent interview on Colorado Public Radio, Colorado Public Defender James Carbaugh explains this in saying, "It's politically expedient to claim criminal justice reform, but we also know that Colorado has some of the lowest funding for mental health treatment in the nation, and so some of these gaps can contribute to things like substance abuse and problems in the community." Carbaugh believes that the pandemic behavior fallout had deep effects on everything from an increase in homelessness to unemployment, kids being out of school, and untreated mental illness. All, he said, contributes to a higher crime rate. Attributing what caused the rise in crime when the economy was struggling and the pandemic was raging, it's multifaceted, he said. It is a complex problem with complex causes and solutions. Sticking with the theme of increased crime, the sheriff says, "And all of a sudden we had an issue in this county where you couldn't walk down most streets or through your subdivision without smelling marijuana or seeing organized crime." Yet, according to the Colorado Department of Justice, after a short peak in 2017, the number of crimes related to cartels have dropped back down since then. So clearly you can tell in this first segment, Sheriff Mikesell was focused on crime increasing in Teller County. So I took some time and went through the Colorado Crime Stats database, and I've pulled together some statistics on Teller County crime, and I've compared it with Chaffee County, which allows legal cannabis, and then I also compared it to Gilpin County, which is where Black Hawk is, where they have legal cannabis and they have legal gambling. This first graph shows Teller County property crime over the last 15 years. Now, while there has been a spike between the years of 2017 and 2018, You can also see that the trend lines are all going down. Well, all except for one, and that's auto thefts. Colorado does rank #1 in the nation for auto theft. But if cannabis were actually the cause of an increase in auto thefts, shouldn't most cannabis states be in the top list? If we look at the actual top list of 15 states, 8 of them are non-legal states. Missouri, Hawaii, Oklahoma, Utah, Tennessee, Texas, South Carolina, and North Dakota all prohibit recreational sales of cannabis. Violent crime in Teller County has seen a slight uptick in recent years. However, none of these can be actually correlated with the legal cannabis space. However, on the flip side, DUIs and narcotics charges have actually shown a relatively steep decline in recent years. And while not nearly as dramatic as the DUI statistics, domestic violence has also seen a decline in the trend line over the last 15 years. Interestingly, when comparing the data, Chaffee County, which has embraced legal cannabis, has seen a significant decline in crime across the board. Again, with the exception of auto theft, crime in Chaffee County has been on a clear downward spiral. Now, Chaffee County has fully embraced cannabis and has several cannabis retail locations. So the argument that retail cannabis is going to increase crime when it comes to Teller County simply doesn't hold water. Now, while Chaffee County has fully embraced retail cannabis and not gambling, so now let's take a look at Gilpin County, where they have both legal cannabis and casinos. Now, it's important to remember that Black Hawk, which is located in Gilpin County, has 18 casinos and is just 40 minutes outside of Denver. Black Hawk claims an average of 20,000 visitors every day. Gilpin County has certainly seen a rise in thefts in the last several years. However, notice that the date of those increases actually started in 2017, which was 5 years after the cannabis industry had taken hold. Trends in violent crime across Gilpin County have remained relatively stable. In Gilpin County, DUI and drug charges have only increased slightly, with the most significant increases happening in 2017 and 2018, again, not related to the cannabis space. As you can tell from this graph, Gilpin County also saw an increase in domestic violence starting in the year 2017. So while Gilpin County statistics clearly show a rise in theft, narcotics, and domestic violence, we have to note that the spike occurs in 2017, not in 2012, which was when cannabis was legalized in Colorado. In fact, if we compare tri-agency statistics, one could speculate that gambling increases crime, not legalized cannabis. These next two slides clearly show that Chaffee County in green has far less crime than Teller County and Gilpin County, where gambling is legal. But Sheriff Meixels continues. Marijuana was put into law in Colorado in 2012. The problem was, we didn't understand the laws, right? Then he confirms that they didn't know the laws, and he said that there was no such thing as black market marijuana, and that there was no such thing as organized crime in Colorado. Marijuana was for everyone. This is simply a false statement. State regulations define black market cannabis in Colorado, and we know that you can't have more than 12 plants at any residence. Selling in any form of cannabis without a commercial retail license is illegal, and reselling cannabis purchases from a legal dispensary is also illegal. So the sheriff continues to point out the problem with opioids and fentanyl and blames the black market logistics. But do you know where fentanyl isn't? It's not an illegal cannabis operation. There are no cartels running legal cannabis businesses in Colorado or in anywhere else. The legal cannabis industry is not contributing to the fentanyl epidemic. The truth is that the Colorado cannabis industry is highly regulated and has stringent licensing requirements, cultivation regulations, production, and packaging rules. Most of all, Colorado cannabis is tested for potency, contaminants, molds, and toxins. Next, Sheriff Meixels shares his opinions on cannabis, stating that he thinks that maybe they're just too old and that they don't understand it, and he just doesn't think so. And he also thinks that recreational marijuana in counties brings up all kinds of issues that people don't see. So by the sheriff's own admission, They didn't really understand the laws when legalization first took place. And then he goes on to say that, maybe they're just old and they don't understand plant, and that there's a lot of issues that come along with recreational marijuana in particular. And so what I want to reply to this is, no, Sheriff, it doesn't have anything to do with your age. You're not old. I'm actually older than you are. And frankly, from the podcast, I don't know that you've ever really sat down and talked to a marijuana user at all. And you are absolutely correct. There's a lot of issues that people don't see with recreational cannabis. And so I want to dive into what the research says about what happens in communities that allow recreational cannabis to come in. This study from January of 2021, which was published in the British Medical Journal, revealed that access to legal cannabis stores is associated with a reduction in opioid-related deaths in the United States, particularly those related to synthetic opioids such as fentanyl. Another study has found that medical marijuana use is associated with a significant reduction in the dependence on opioids and other prescription drugs. Another study from 2019, researchers determined that those states with legal marijuana access experienced a decrease in opioid prescriptions. And a 2020 meta-study signaled that marijuana shows promise as a treatment option for chronic pain and can serve as an alternative to opioid-based painkillers. And then there's this study published in the journal Health Economics that reads, recreational cannabis legalizations associated with reduction in prescription drug utilizations among Medicaid enrollees. In this next segment of the Sheriff's podcast, he talks about marijuana taxes and the fact that, and he refers to them as the big lie, because he says that he hasn't seen any of that money and neither have any of the Teller County school districts. So let's take a look at what he has to say, and then let's go take a look at what state budgets have to say. In the podcast, the sheriff asks, have you seen any of that marijuana money? I know most schools will tell you that they haven't. It was a big lie when they talked about all the good things that marijuana could do. A quick review of the state budget documents actually contradict the sheriff's claim. The BEST program in 2021-2022 gave the Cripple Creek School District over $12,000. The Early Literacy Grant gave Cripple Creek $511,000 in 2018. The School Health Professional Program actually granted several grants of money to various school districts in Teller County. And the Student Re-Engagement Grant gave Cripple Creek $96,900 a year for 3 years. In total, the county has seen $1.5 million in tax funds since 2018. But Cripple Creek school districts aren't the only public service to receive marijuana taxes. In fact, since 2018, Teller County Sheriff's Office has received 5 grants totaling $244,000. Likewise, the Woodland Park Police Department has also received 5 grants totaling $244,000 in 5 years. Cripple Creek has received another $4,200 for 1 grant in 2019, and in total, law enforcement in Teller County has received nearly $500,000 in 5 years. Which means that Teller County has received more than $2 million in marijuana tax funds since 2018. And that's without legal cannabis. We can do better. Take a look at what other communities have done with their marijuana tax dollars. Now, the sheriff brought up driving while impaired, and absolutely right. We don't want more impaired drivers on the streets. However, let's take a look at some DUI statistics and compare, again, those 3 counties that we compared earlier. And let's see just how big of a problem driving while impaired with cannabis is here in Teller County and in other counties. As we showed in this earlier graph, DUIs in Teller County have been on a sharp decline for several years now. Likewise, in Chaffee County, where recreational marijuana has been fully embraced, DUIs continue to decline there as well. However, where the data starts to get interesting is when we start to compare the tri-county agencies. Interestingly, of all 3 counties, when we total the numbers together, Teller County has the most DUI arrests of all 3 counties and the most marijuana arrests in all 3 counties, which accounts for 5.9% of the arrests. When we drill down and look a little closer, you can see that Teller County actually has arrested 52% of the marijuana DUIs across all 9 agencies. In other words, more than half of the marijuana DUIs across 3 counties and 9 agencies came from the only non-cannabis embracing county. After taking a walk down Nostalgia Lane, the sheriff claims that marijuana is the big change that's causing the increase in crime without providing any kind of correlation. Then he quickly jumps to the increased homeless population, saying that a lot of them came here from El Paso County and then they got pushed to Teller County, and now they're going to see it compound in Cripple Creek. But in regards to Sheriff Meixel's argument about homeless, I have to stop the train on this one and say, let's stop and look at this story and put some logic into it first before we try to blame cannabis for this issue. So in this argument, he is talking about the homeless that are in El Paso County, Manitou Springs, and in the more populated areas coming up the mountain. And he blames cannabis on this. But why would a homeless person travel 15 miles and 3,000 feet of elevation gain for a plant that is readily available where they were at in the first place and not available here? We don't have any cannabis businesses here. The homeless are not coming into Teller County for the cannabis. Naturally, Sheriff Meixels brings up, what about the kids? This is a common argument for most people against legal cannabis. However, according to recent statistics, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment shows that the number of kids using cannabis has dropped off drastically in recent years. Another study published in the Journal of Adolescent Health showed that the data shows that there was no evidence linking the rise in marijuana use in adolescents to states where cannabis is legal. And still another study from 2021 in the Journal of American Medical Association shows that there was no significant associations between the enactment of recreational marijuana or medical marijuana in marijuana use in high school students. Now in this segment, the sheriff says that he doesn't understand who they're going to sell it to, and that he's worried about the cannabis products that could make it over state lines and into other areas. So what the sheriff just explained here is actually called cannabis tourism, and it's a legitimate industry in the United States, and it is booming. People are traveling everywhere they can possibly go to be able to go and enjoy cannabis products where they're staying. Colorado has been a huge player in that market because of the fact that Colorado is just an all-around awesome state to begin with. And then you factor in legal cannabis, and people want to come here and they want to try these things out, and they want to be able to go back to their friends and say, oh my goodness, I went to Colorado and I tried this and it was so incredible. They want those stories. And this is a booming industry making millions every year. Of course, the casinos want to cash in on that. And the residents should too, because these are the types of tax dollars that are really going to benefit the community. So this is something that's absolutely legitimate. And you can see from these next statistics that I'm going to talk about, actually product traveling outside of Colorado is coming back down. And a lot of that has to do with legalization in other states. People don't have to come to Colorado and get the products that they want to take home. They can go to, say, Michigan, or maybe they're going to go out to Massachusetts. They can go to multiple states now and get what they need. And so the fact is that in just a few years, this is all going to be federally legal. And so when this is all becomes federally legal and interstate commerce becomes a thing, and we're now stomping our feet and throwing a fit because we don't want our products to leave the state, how silly is that going to look in 2 or 3 years when federal legalization happens? We can't control what people do when they leave Colorado. We can absolutely control what they do while they're here in our county. Although out-of-state seizures for Colorado marijuana products peaked in 2017, it came back down in 2019. Earlier this year, Forbes reported that $4.5 billion in marijuana sales was driven by tourists. And yet another report in 2020 found that 29% of all active leisure travelers, 18% of all Americans, want to do cannabis-related activities while on vacation. So I'd like to close this out, not as an argument, but as an open invitation. I would love to have the sheriff or anyone there within the sheriff's staff anyone from City Council in Cripple Creek, anyone from City Council in Woodland Park, anybody that would love to have an educated, civilized conversation about cannabis and cannabis consumers and the legal cannabis space, would love to have that conversation with you. Thanks so much for your time and listening to this podcast. And don't forget to get out there in November, Cripple Creek residents. Vote for cannabis. It is going to change this community, but not in a way that the sheriff thinks it will. It is going to bring so much more to the community, so much more revenue, so much more tax dollars, so many more tourist opportunities. And since that's what Cripple Creek is built on, then I feel like this is an opportunity that has to be embraced.